Meanwhile, back in the world of Star Trek The Next Generation, you know, the real one, we come to another rather significant episode concerning Data. And this one was called Datalore. Get it? Yeah. It also introduces the crystalline entity, which becomes significant later on and all that. But it introduces more backstory for Data. Which at the time was like, you say, oh, they're going to have an android crew member on the show. And then you see him and it's like, well, why is he like all pale yellow? His eyes are yellow, what, you know? And it's, oh, maybe he's from an alien race or whatever. And it's like, no, he's just a different version, and apparently a more advanced version than androids we'd seen before in Star Trek. And a lot of the android stories was more about how much of an illusion androids represented in Star Trek, which probably the better approach considering where we are today with concerns about AI and the like. And of course, most famously in the episode What a Little Girl's Made Of, where Christine Chapel, searching for her lost husband, seemingly finds him only to discover he had died long ago, and this was his android version of himself, which he claims is, it's still me, and demonstrates that it is not still him. A pretty good facsimile, but a facsimile nonetheless, which pretty much also destroys the whole idea of Android Picard in the Picard series. But what are you gonna do? You know, apparently nothing. Yeah. So anyway, but Data, you have to consider, is a pursuit to double down on the idea of approaching human life by artificial means. And despite Frankenstein warning against it, but Data was a lovable character. And obviously, what was the origins of Data? Well, it goes back to Star Trek Phase 2. No, not the Kurtzman Phase 2 idiocy of trying to copy Marvel with their phases. No. There was once an attempt to do a new Star Trek series in the 70s called Star Trek Phase 2. The whole cast had agreed to come back except Leonard Nimoy. And so because Leonard Nimoy was not there, they were going to introduce a new Vulcan character who I believe was either full Vulcan, or was he supposed to be half Romulan too? I can't remember. I know that was Savick still. But anyway, the idea is that he has no experience with humans, to speak of. And so he has to learn all this stuff. And so he became a bit like Data is here. In fact, a couple of the scripts that were written, or at least the outlines or pitches for them that they were going to do for the series, ended up being a part of Next Generation. And of course, you know, you've got other similarities because Star Trek Phase 2 eventually became the motion picture because Star Wars hit and they said, we need a movie. And so basically the pilot that would have been the pilot for Phase 2 becomes the motion picture. And actually, the actor who played that Vulcan dies off in the space station early on in the movie. So, what are you going to do? And then, of course, there was the other. I don't think was it the same name, I think, the one who died in the transporter. But anyway, but that was the deal. This guy doesn't understand human nature and is trying to discover it. So the template of the character is within that Vulcan. And then when you move forward to Next Generation, which borrowed a lot of templates from Phase 2, obviously Riker and Troy is Ilea and Decker and so on and so forth. Data is formed out of that template of that Vulcan character. And so they went with Android. And then this idea is that he's an android of mysterious origins. The Data himself doesn't quite know his origins, and he's just found. And so we delve into this story, this bit of mystery, to what happened to this colony, and ultimately revealed that the crystalline entity attacked it. And the crystalline entity is kind of like Galactus in Marvel, which is kind of the conclusion they come to later in another episode. But that's the deal. And he discovers, there was another model of Data, and of course this is lore. And Laura says, well, I was the perfect one because, you know, I know how to mimic human emotion and all that. And not only mimic it, he appears to have it, you know. And turns out he was jealous and resentful of the rejection that the humans had for him and whatnot. And so he contacts the crystalline entity to, hey, come over here, and wipes everybody out. And but before that happened, he was dismantled and stored away. Data, with no memory of this, does survive and is discovered, but they never found the secret lab that Dr. Singh had and all that. But it's really the first step into developing Data's backstory, which they revisit repeatedly throughout the series and even into the films, but it's the series does it much better. So that's the deal. And so the evil double. You know, of course, what does he do? Switches clothes with Data and all that, tricks them for a while. And of course, Wesley is the one who discovers, and, you know, despite being told to shut up. But anyway, all in all, it's not bad of a story, and it lays some important groundwork for it all. And it's interesting. It's just, I wish there had been a little more explanation for overall Star Trek lore, especially this early on, because this was the second follow-up series to the original. And that business of androids and more mention of it, and maybe even interaction for Data with some of those androids who look more human than he does, but are nowhere near as advanced as he was. I mean, of course, you had Corby was probably the closest advanced thing you'd seen out of the old show. When you get to, Harry Mudd finding those androids, they weren't always, I mean, they looked more human, but they weren't really on par with Data's intellect and what have you. So, Datalore is vitally important, and of course, it does introduce this recurring villain that Lore represents, and goes in directions that become a bit more sad rather than just evil Data, and so, there you are. So, again, I'm harsh on the initial seasons of Next Generation, but there's diamonds in the rough, and overall, they still have great sci-fi concept, which is severely lacking in programming today that claim to be sci-fi shows. But anyway, this was one of the better ones. So following that, it's just a silly. I mean, then the concept again is fine, and in fact, the old show would have done something like this. Basically, the Enterprise is looking for a lost crew of a freighter, and they come upon this planet, Angel 1. And, you've heard of the patriarchy. Well, this planet is dominated by the matriarchy. So women are on top. And so basically, the women are the governing powers and what have you and all that. And men are they're just supposed to sit there and look pretty. And they got them walking around in these idiot outfits and all that stuff. Right off the bat, the leader says, find your people and you can take them home, whatever. But she's already taken with Commander Riker. And, of course, Riker, he's quite the alpha male, She's like, wow, this is the kind of man I haven't encountered before. So it's interesting that she immediately lusts for him. But he's got to wear one of the lingerie that the men wear. But, of course, knowing Riker, he's perfectly fine with this because he's like, well, hey, it's my duty. I got to sleep with this hot blonde. And then a similar thing happens with her, I guess her lieutenant or whatever, Bonnie from Knight Rider. Turns out she's secretly fallen in love with the leader of the freighter survivors. And, they're not going to fit in with this culture. And because they've become involved with the people on the planet, they don't want to leave, even though culturally they don't fit in. And that's their natural structure, as it were, that the women are in charge and the men are subservient. So they got a problem with this. And so that's the conflict. But ultimately they decide, well, maybe it's time for change. That's a bit silly. I mean, especially since it was completely oriented this way. And even though there were women on the planet who agreed with this notion, we need to, change this and all that. But still, it's kind of funny. The alpha males show up. And the women are like, oh, I like him. He's really sexy and all that stuff. And then, of course, noticing the little dude who walks in on Riker and the leader, and he's like really jealous and upset. There's a whole thing, how maybe backstabbing things would they do to conspire against these interlopers, and they wouldn't like it. So I don't think things are going to go well for Angel One once the Enterprise is like, well, we're done. The guy wants to stay, so good luck with that, and they leave. Eventually, Angel One becomes Devil One because of the bloody civil war that erupts as a result. But anyway, so it's rather simplistic, and it's hard not to laugh at some of it, But it is what it is. But it's one of these takes on, hey, what if it was different and it was this way? And okay, take a stab at that. And certainly, this could have been a show that the old Kirk show would have done. So anyway, there you are for this little visit with classic, Star Trek The Next Generation classic. Yeah.